So EVs are bad for the environment. They're bad for everybody. And Tesla is the worst of the worst. Or are they? I have reason to believe they might not be. And it turns out there was a study that might back it up. I'm being joined today by Herbert from Brighter. And I'm Brian. Welcome to Future Raza. Herbert, how are you today, my friend?
I'm doing great, Brian. Love your entry. Your
Oh, yeah.
intros are great.
Gotta come in strong, I say. Yeah, lots of fun there. And by the way, I should mention before we get too far into it, the lineup has been announced for the Owners Club of Michigan big event in June with Sandy Monroe, Kyle from Out of Spec,
Yeah.
Lars from Best in Tesla. Turns out John Stringer from the Silicon Valley Owners Club might be there as well. That's new information to me. Very excited about that. A lot of really great people will be there. Check it out. I'm sure I'll pop a link in the description. So what we've got today is this little tidbit. Ford, Mercedes, and Tesla have the least problematic EV supply chain. Coalition of environmental, climate, and human rights groups ranked 18 of the world's largest automakers on their efforts to eliminate, emissions, environmental harms, and human rights violations from their supply chains. Now, I didn't have an opinion of Ford or Mercedes going in, but this kind of came as a little bit of a surprise, I guess, to me. Did you have any thoughts on that?
No. I mean, it did not come to a surprise that Tesla would be the top up there, but it's come to a surprise to many other people, right? Because you were saying earlier, people actually think Tesla, they hammer Tesla so much, and somehow they think that Tesla's the one that is, the batteries that they use and just how they, they're not environmentally friendly. And of course, the Giga Berlin, the whole news, hoo-ha there was always about the environmental impact of these factories. But apparently Tesla wasn't reporting until just very recently. And so clearly they are the most vertically integrated, right? They're so automated. They have less, issues with the human rights. They always have, a mission. They're always driven that way. And so that's something that's very important to them. So it's not a surprise to me that they're actually, right up the very top. It's curious for us, I think, to look at what was the criteria used to evaluate this, because it sounds very, very broad, from my understanding.
I think it'd be very difficult to make it a comprehensive thing that includes everyone and doesn't unfairly punish some over others due to smaller factors that are not necessarily within their control. But if your product uses parts made with slave labor, that's obviously a bad thing. If it's, and most EVs globally, most EVs sold are LFP. There's no cobalt in those.
Yeah.
And the cobalt used in the nickel metal batteries are already being reduced. So that's nothing but good news all around. Rankings were compiled by Lead the Charge, a global coalition of leading climate, environmental, and human rights organizations that includes Sierra Club Project, Sunrise Project, and Public Citizen, among others. So yeah, they want to look at it and see how everyone's doing. Uh,
Yeah, let's take a look at the list. Because what's interesting about this list at the very bottom, right? You've got Toyota, you've got the Chinese, right? So forth, Geely, right? They're the way at the bottom. Um, And at the top are the North American ones. I mean, this sounds like what you would expect. Again, it just depends on who's doing the measurement, how accurate are they, and it's very, very broad, right? They're talking about, carbon emissions, human rights. They cover supplier, climate, environmental, and human rights. Those are the things that they're looking at, right? It's just very, very broad.
it is, and I should point out that these ones at the bottom of the list are still. This is still the top 10%. So
Yeah.
these aren't bad companies. These are just not quite as good. Uh, General leaderboard score. Although at number 18, you get to 1% score. So I guess everyone else is tied for 19th, the remaining 170 plus names on the list. So that's tricky. Yeah, US automakers showed the most progress, leading score of 42%, surpassing last year's winner of Mercedes. And like you said, Tesla hadn't reported these numbers before, but to anyone who understands Tesla's supply chain, it shouldn't be a surprise because while it's the most American made car in America, It is the most Chinese. It is among the most Chinese-made cars in China. It is among the most German car-made cars in Germany, because they do what they can to reduce the um, to localize part and supplies as much as they can. Now, did you see that Tesla actually slipped significantly on their most American-made index this year?
That was weird. Yeah, that is odd. That was because of the Model 3 Highland, wasn't it?
It is. It's because of the battery sourcing on,
Yeah.
especially the rear-wheel drive version. Those are not U.S. made batteries.
And in this back in this list, the thing that I'm trying to understand right now is whether or not the fact that the car maker makes electric vehicles isn't that one of the biggest ways to impact the environmental harm and carbon emissions? And you know what I mean? Like if you look at that from that perspective, why would Ford and Mercedes be at the very top?
It's a great question, and I know Ford has a lot of gas guzzlers on the road. Their best sellers are all gas guzzlers, and maybe they've taken strides to improve that. I'm sure they do every year, but it's still a big question mark. Uh, and I'd be curious to know who's actually getting dinged um, for getting parts from a sweatshop, because that would be
Yeah.
a question
It
I'd want
does
to
look
know.
like here there's a paragraph that says Toyota Honda were among the worst performing automakers this year, along with Kia and Nissan. The group knocked the companies for slower progress on the transition to EVs while also ignoring supply chain emissions and indigenous rights. So, yeah,
Hmm.
so that transition to EVs is clearly one of the top. It's just, you know what I mean, how these rankings always work. It depends on what weight and magnitude you apply to each criteria.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate that progress can't be made more quickly, but I guess we can celebrate what progress we do see. Overall, scores were just average scores overall were 19%, and no company scored over 50% against the total number of indicators. Uh, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think, unlike crash safety standards where they keep making the standards more strict each year, I think it's okay to aspire for a perfect score out of the gate and let people recognize that if you're at, if you're at 43% or whatever it is to get into number one, 42%, that you would have that much room to improve. And I think it's something they should improve on. My question for the viewers would be, how much does this matter? How concerned are you actually about it? Uh, would it impact your buying decision if you could get a, a Hyundai that's exactly as good as a Mach E for the same price?
Hmm.
Would this impact your decision? Would you consider the Mach E over the Hyundai because of that? Would you care? And how do you feel seeing, Chinese brands, which are not always, Chinese manufacturing has a reputation for not the best supply chain, and seeing them above so many of the big players that we think of as the leaders in the industry? So I'd be very curious about that. Uh, what do you think is left to be done? What can we do to make this even better?
Well, I actually do think it's a good thing, right? At the end of the day, that some organization is tracking this. The question is, how are they motivated? Is there some monetary, assignment if you get higher in the list or less? Um, there's definitely penalties. I know that's out there. So there's already existing things, but to just publicize this, make people aware that there's this measurement, that's good. It's always a good thing. Um, what's the biggest issue? People think it's batteries, right? But if they can, the movement away from cobalt was something they need to communicate more. Otherwise, the impact to the environment is really is just it's like the whole point of going electric vehicle is the impact of the environment of ICE vehicles, gas cars is the one that's most. And that's where I don't think that they're waiting is right. It should be in electric vehicles is like just more than the gas cars. And so I don't see how come Ford gets up to the top there. I just don't understand that part.
Definitely don't understand that. There was a conversation I had on Reddit the other day where someone complained that the mining for EVs is a problem. And I pointed out
Hmm.
that most batteries globally are LFP, and that, especially in the case of BYD, who I think the conversation might have been about, they use, I believe, exclusively LFP batteries, which
Hmm.
don't contain cobalt or nickel or any of the,
Very
especially
rare
cobalt.
earth.
Right.
Hmm.
And so he posted a link pointing to a mining report on cobalt and lithium. And I said also lithium is abundant, it exists in every country. And he posted a link about how problematic it is to deal with cobalt and lithium. And I said, right, but cobalt is just not being used. I feel like I just said that. He said, right, but lithium is, and it's still a problem. If the cars weigh the same, the number of atoms that go into a new EV is roughly the same as the number of atoms that go into a new gasoline powered car. There's mining in both cases. And if you then add the fact that you're going to have to add thousands of additional tons in some cases to get the fuel into the vehicle,
Yeah.
that's a much bigger problem.
I don't know how it's not so clear that oil is very damaging, but they just want to do status quo and they want to blame electric vehicles when clearly it is by miles better for the environment. That's what we're doing here.
It just doesn't always make sense. Well, Herbert, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Go ahead and check him out. He is the one who makes us brighter, and we are grateful for it. Everybody else, like, subscribe, do the usual things. Stay tuned and juicy, and I cannot wait to hear from you, clever robots, on the next one.